What's poppin', everybody? Episode 42 of the Slip and Weed podcast. We're back, baby. Had to take a little time off, but we're back. I want to talk a little bit about last weekend's fight between Devin Haney and Jorge Linares. Want to also talk about Nonito Donaire's, amazing knockout victory over Nordine Oubaali. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the heavyweight division and why we're not going to get to see Fury versus Joshua when we would like to. And I want to talk about another big fight that got announced this week. So let's get right into all of it. So Haney versus Linares. I talked about this fight a couple weeks ago with my guest Jay Calderon, Boxing Talk. Definitely go check that out. I think it's episode 37 or 38. So we did a breakdown of what we thought was going to happen beforehand. This was a really good fight, man, and I think it was the right time for Haney to take this fight. I think it was the right amount of challenge. And at the end of the day, I think Linares made a pretty good showing of himself. Considering some of the circumstances. The first, at least third or half of the fight was dominated by Haney's jab. I mean, the volume, the consistency of it, it was just nonstop. And as much as Linares would block and move his head, Haney kept the volume and the pressure of that jab up so much that it took a little while for Linares to slip some offense in between all that, because Haney's pace is really hard to keep up with, and where he puts the team, he mixes up where he puts his jab. It's very unpredictable. He changes the speed and the power on it, so he has a way of really keeping you on your heels, much in a similar way that as Floyd did with his jab. And he also has the ability to let go of a nice fast combination. But as the fight wore on, you could kind of see Linares taking notes as he went, you know what I mean? And you could see, even if he was eating some jabs, he was blocking a lot, and he was very much switched on. So by round 6 or 7, you start seeing Linares land some really hard shots, hurt him at the end of the 10th round. And I think in the back half of the fight, maybe win even the majority of the rounds, particularly the last 3, which was where it was either at the end of the 9th or the end of the 10th, he landed something that hurt Haney, and Haney kind of stumbled back to his corner. And for whatever reason, the referee allowed him to do an insane amount of holding. I mean, he did his job, right? He's buzzed. So his job is to get through that. So he's going to grab one. It's the referee's job to break it quickly and to make sure that it's not being done in an excessive way, right? That's not even necessarily up to Haney. Haney's doing his job, but I thought that more allowed Haney to hold at a level of where you're not even trying to set up any kind of offense. You're not trying to engage in the fight, with this holding. You're trying to avoid the fight. And so I think in that sense, there's a limit on how long you get to do that and how often you get to do that and how obvious it is that that's the only thing you're trying to do, which is what I kind of felt like. So I'm not saying Linares got ripped off or anything, or got ripped off of anything, but I think that the ref definitely did him a solid by not at least giving him a warning yo, this is excessive. And so as a result, he was able to kind of slide through the last couple of rounds, but he took a lot of punishment in that, and not a lot of punishment, but he took some really hard, clean punches in the last 4 rounds, and really in the last 6 rounds when Linares was able to kind of work out what he was doing. And he showed a little bit of vulnerability. He showed that maybe you can buzz him a little bit, but he also showed that his offense is a lot to handle. even for somebody at the level of Linares, who's been in there with the best of the best. And And at a time you could have said he was the best of the best, among the best at lightweight. Haney showed a lot of good things. I'm telling you, that jab is going to be very difficult for anybody to deal with, particularly if he can continue to improve and stay switched on. See, the thing that he did that I didn't understand was he started kind of sitting in the pocket with Linares, and it really gave Linares a chance to land some really strong, fast combinations that I think fucked him up a little bit. I don't know if it was just, I got to go get this guy, or he was starting to get a little tired. Maybe some of the body shots start to take an effect at that point in the fight. But I think he engaged at times where he really didn't need to. And if he does that maybe against somebody who's even one level up from Linares, right, which at that point you're fighting the elite at lightweight. If he does that with the wrong guy, here's the thing, right? If he did 12 rounds of that fight the way he did the first round, it's hard for me to imagine anybody beating him. But if he can't be consistent with it, guys at this level are going to figure out as they go. And that's hopefully the lesson he learned, was like, you got to be consistent with it. Otherwise, somebody that is as good as Linares is going to make that adjustment, and come on stronger. So I think really strong performance. I think a lot of lessons learned for him in this fight. And for me personally, my esteem of him definitely goes up. I've definitely questioned some of his skill set before. Not that he's not a great boxer, but just that it falls a little flat, or he goes up, down to the competition. When you do that, have that kind of performance against somebody that good, it makes you that much more credible. And I think now, Ryan Garcia doesn't have a win this good. I don't think, the Campbell win is good, but Linares beat Campbell. So he is kind of that one level up, where it's like Linares is the bottom of the top 10 at this weight. He's like 7 or 6, or, he's in there. I don't know if Tank has a win that good at lightweight. I don't think he does. The only one is Teofimo, because he beat Lomachenko. But outside of that, this is one of the best wins that any of these young guys has gotten yet, for sure. And I mean, look at Linares. Haney goes up to 26-0, 15 knockouts. He just fought a guy with 53 fights. Linares is 47-6. So it's a big experience gap. And I just give both of them props for taking the fight and for both having really strong performances. I know everyone has said, including me, that Linares is chinny, but I don't see him as like an Amir Khan, where he's just constantly getting put out with one. I've only seen him get put out with one, against Kano. And even at that, it was like he got up. You could see Kano was way bigger. Kano landed another combination, but there was never one shot that put him out. So I hope this maybe disproves some of that he's like an exclusively chinny fighter. I think he showed that he's a pretty durable guy, because I don't think Haney is like a feather fist. I think he hits hard. And if anything, Haney was the one that got hurt in this fight, not Linares. Especially in the back end. So there's a lot of good things here. There's a lot to work on. And I think for Haney, what I want to see next is, I wouldn't be too pissed if they did a rematch of this. This is a really good fight. I think these guys are well matched. I think they would both make adjustments. I think Linares would make a lot of adjustments, and having seen what he needed to see in that first 6 rounds, I think he would start a little earlier. But of course, Haney would make adjustments to make that hit, to counter his adjustment. So I would love to see a rematch of this fight. Obviously, I think at this point we all want to see Haney in with the very best at lightweight. And for whatever reason, he's not quite there. But now that he's fighting this level of guy, maybe we can get him in with a Javier Fortuna, maybe Robert Easter, something like that. But I definitely want to see him continue to test himself. And again, man, shout out to these young guys right now, man. They're fighting the very best in the division. They're not scared. They're not necessarily fighting each other, but they're fighting anybody else that's relevant. And They're doing it at a very young age. These are not cupcakes they're fighting. These are the best fighters in the world. So, yeah, the other fight from that night I wanted to talk about was the great Nonito Donaire stopping Nordine Oubaali in the 4th round. You know, since Donaire moved back down to bantamweight, you know, I watched his fight with Inoue and the other fights from the Super 6. Or not the Super 6, I'm sorry, the World Boxing Super Series. He looks like Nonito Donaire that was Fighter of the Year in 2011 or whatever. He looks fucking amazing. I mean, for years he fought guys that were bigger than him and stronger than him, and in most cases younger and faster and da-da-da-da. And when you do that, you pick up some L's along the way. And now that he's returned down to this natural weight at bantamweight, he looks like a killer again, and he looks like one of the best fighters in the world, honestly. I thought he looked spectacular in this fight, and I got like a little bit emotional watching it, because it was like the first time I watched this guy, I was like a teenager, you know. I was like 13, 14 years old when he beat Darchinian, and for the first time. And I've just followed his career the whole time, and he's fought really a who's who of that weight neighborhood. He's never backed away from a fight, and he's one of my favorite guys to watch. So to me, him fighting Oubaali, a younger undefeated champion at bantamweight, seemed like something that he would do anyway. And after the Inoue fight, I really liked his chances. Oubaali is a good puncher, but he's not even really that good a puncher. He's a really good boxer. But there's an element of it that is a little bit predictable. Like, it's very standard. His technique is very standard. It's textbook, but it's almost too textbook. And someone like Donaire, with his athleticism and his power and his feet, I mean, he does a similar thing that Pacquiao does, where he has the way he closes the distance. He closes distance so fast. It's like that. You know, he could be on the other side of the ring, and it's like he's on you like this. So with Nonito, I just think that it's really incredible that at 38 that he's still doing it at this level. There's more guys in boxing fighting at this level. So I think when we start talking about age in boxing, we have to reframe our thinking a little bit. I think, because I hear it in the commentary. So I'm like, oh my God, he's 32 years old, and he's like, there's guys that go pro at 32 now after having long amateur careers. So I think how we as fans perceive age in boxing, it has to just be based on how much punishment you take and what you look like in the ring. Because I've seen guys that are 29 that look old. I've seen guys that are 40 that look like they can get it done. So everybody's timeline is different. And I think that Donaire, the fact that he physically can still get down to that weight, says a lot about him and how he's taken care of himself over the years and his discipline. You know, this was a really special performance. If you didn't get to watch this, I think this was a really special performance, because it's one of those moments where if you woke up the next morning and you saw, Oubaali wins close decision over Donaire, would you be surprised? Even if you watch the fight, Donaire won 7 rounds and they gave the fight to Oubaali, would you really be surprised? Like, if it was he just couldn't, but he smoked this guy. It wasn't even competitive. The 3rd round, he drops him. The guy barely goes back to his corner. The 4th round starts and Donaire just kind of blasts him out of there. Too much speed, too much power. He's bigger than his opponents again. He looks like a killer, man. I mean, how much fun would it be if Donaire and Rigondeaux were able to do a rematch of their fight from, I think they fought in 2012 or 2013. So I know that Rigondeaux was supposed to fight John Rail Casimero pretty soon. But if Donaire is not going to fight Inoue in a rematch in his next fight, I would love to see him in with the winner of Casimero and Rigondeaux. And I think that the winner of that fight is going to be Rigondeaux. And if it is, I think that that's a really great rematch. And how cool would that be if it happened like almost 10 years later and these guys are essentially both at the top of bantamweight again, legitimately. It's not like a gimmick rematch. It's like a meaningful rematch. I mean, that would say so much about both of these guys. So, big shout out to Nonito Donaire, man. He's been one of my favorites for however the fuck long. He's been around 15 years. And I'm glad that we get to keep watching him do his thing and do it at a very, very high level. Next thing I want to talk about is the situation in the heavyweight division right now. So, at some point it was announced that Fury... I was going to talk about this earlier, of course. So this is somewhat old news. But maybe you are thinking that you're going to see Fury and Joshua soon, and you're wondering, why the fuck am I not going to see it? So this is me explaining it to you. Basically, they had Fury and Joshua, the fight announced for August 14th. Right? It was going to be in Saudi Arabia. They had the site figured out. August 14th. Right? While that's happening, and I guess while they're negotiating the fight between Fury and Joshua, Wilder has taken it to arbitration that he believes he's entitled to a third fight with Fury contractually. So he's taken that to arbitration. And not terribly long after that fight for August 14th is announced, it is also comes out that Wilder wins the arbitration and that he is, in fact, entitled to a third fight with Fury. So immediately that puts the Fury-Joshua fight in question, and then not long after that, it cancels it. Because, again, not long after that, they put pen to paper that Fury-Wilder 3 is going to happen July 24th. And while all that's happening, the WBO orders Joshua to fight Usyk, and says to him, if you're not going to fight Usyk, you got to prove to us why you're not going to fight Usyk. So that's the short version of what happened. Fury Joshua is not happening right now because Deontay Wilder is contractually entitled to a third fight. So there's some things about this that are fucking annoying as shit, right? Like, this was a really great moment where we maybe could have had an undisputed heavyweight champion that is clearly, for sure, 100% the best guy in the world with all four belts, right? Joshua's got 3 of them. Fury's got 1 of them and the claim to being the lineal champion. So that's obviously the fight we all wanted to see, right? And if I'm being brutally honest, I don't give a shit about Fury Wilder 3. I don't give a fuck about that fight, dude. I could care less. I mean, good on Wilder for having the balls to want to do it. It shows that he's a champion. But there's nothing he can do from an IQ sense to beat this guy. This guy's got his number. He's a vastly better boxer than Wilder. And he's also shown that he can just step to him and muscle him around and fuck him up. And I just don't see Wilder even doing mitts and looking pretty and all that. I just don't see how he doesn't have the boxing skills to dissuade Fury from doing whatever the fuck Fury wants to do. If Fury wants to have a twinkle toes fight, it's going to be a twinkle toes fight, just like the first one. If Fury wants to have a brawl, it's going to be a brawl just like the second one. And Wilder's shown that he can't match that. Even if he puts this guy flat on his fucking back, he's the one guy that gets up. Right? So, I don't give a shit about that fight. But if that fight happening means that it opens up the door for Fury and Joshua, let's get it popping. The fight that I do actually care about is Joshua and Usyk. And I've been saying that for a long time. That's one of the best fights you can make at the whole heavyweight division, because you have Joshua, who is a really good boxer, good boxing IQ, good jab, good footwork, hand speed. You know, he's got all the things. And Usyk, to me, is the most athletic, pure boxer in all of heavyweight boxing. He's also the smallest heavyweight in elite heavyweight boxing. So it does give him that that one kind of disadvantage. And like my guest Otis Griffin said, in his first fight at heavyweight, he didn't wear heavyweight punches all that well. You know, it looked like they affected him. And honestly, against Chisora, it looked like they affected him too. I think less so because he was on the move. He was moving his head real nice. He was blocking a lot. But you could see when Chisora was landing that it was moving him. But his hand speed and his coordination, he's hitting you at times where no other heavyweight is going to hit you, with combinations no other heavyweight's going to hit you with. So that's a meaningful fight to me. Fury Wilder 3, I don't really give a shit about that. But Joshua and Usyk is actually, I think, one of the best fights in all of heavyweight boxing and maybe even all of boxing. It's a great matchup. So if those are two fights that we got to watch in order to get to Fury Joshua, I'm all for it. The problem is, there's always with somebody who punches the way that Wilder does, there's always the chance that everything I just said is wrong. Right? Because he could just land one and you're out like a light. That's definitely a possibility anytime he steps in the ring. So anything I just said could go out the window like that. 11 rounds, 2 minutes, 59 seconds of that could go away like that. Because he's got that equalizer and he's the best puncher in boxing. Right? So these are also high risk fights to take in order to get that. I think that Usyk could beat Joshua. I think there's a potential he gives him a boxing lesson. So if Usyk gives Joshua a boxing lesson, now you fuck this money up. Because there's no way Usyk and Fury is anywhere near as marketable as Joshua and Fury. In the UK and really anywhere else, I mean, that's the marketable fight. Usyk is a great fighter, but he doesn't have that same kind of name recognition that Joshua or that Fury has. So I think that taking fights this risky puts the mega fight in danger. That's always the risk you take. If you don't put a mega fight together in the moment that it's there to be made, you always, risk losing that opportunity. We've seen it so many times in boxing. Off the top of my head, Juan Manuel Lopez and Gamboa were on the same card all the fucking time when they were younger, and they just never wound up fighting each other. So there's always that chance that you spoil it by just waiting too long, and then somebody loses and the fight loses its marketability, and then it's not what you want it to be. It doesn't have the same meaning anymore. But this is the politics of boxing, man. And there's a part of me that feels like Arum had to know this was a risk and just wasn't verbalizing that. I don't have any proof of that, but how do you not fucking know this is a possibility? You know what I mean? You're signing a fucking multi-million-dollar fight. You should probably make sure that's cleared up. So, anyway, the last thing I want to talk about this week is the fact that on August 21st, Manny Pacquiao is going to fight Errol Spence, which is a fucking crazy fight, man. I've been calling for that one for a hot minute, right? At welterweight to figure out who the best welterweight is. It's like Spence, Pacquiao, and Crawford all got to fight each other. The only way we find out. There's 10 guys at that weight that are great, but these are clearly the top 3. And everybody's saying did Manny get old? Manny hasn't fought in 2 years. So no, he didn't get old. Maybe he got rusty, but he hasn't been taking punishment to where he would just somehow look way worse than he did against Thurman. I don't see that happening. I think there's a possibility that there's a little bit of ring rust, and this would be the wrong guy to have a little bit of ring rust against. But Manny's in this fight, man. If you don't think Manny Pacquiao's in this fight, you haven't been watching him very much. The guy's won 62 fights, and there's a reason for that. Because every time he moves up in weight, that power carries, and his speed and his timing and the awkwardness with which he throws his punches and his combinations, it's hard for anybody to handle. And that's why Keith Thurman couldn't handle it. He got caught in that first round. He was never right after that. And he's doing that to guys that are bigger, stronger, faster, younger. I think Errol, the question is always, is it Errol or is it Crawford? Right? I think everybody pretty much knows that those are the top 2 guys. But Pacquiao is the money fight, and Pacquiao is the legend in the weight class. And that's long since established. That's 10 years that's been established now. And I think it sucks for Terrence Crawford that he's been boxed out of this equation. That was actually one of the first things I thought was, what about TC? Who the fuck is Bud gonna fight? And it's tricky because this is a fight I want to see too. There's a part of me that I'd rather see the winner of Spence Crawford fight Pacquiao, but sometimes in boxing you got to take what you can get a little bit. Like, I'm always one to say don't buy this, whatever, but this is a great fight. And I've been saying this for a long time. Like, at a certain point, it's on Terrence Crawford to have the career that he wants to have. If he feels hostage to Bob Arum, he should do everything he can to leave. If he doesn't feel hostage to Bob Arum and he's cool with being the odd man out of like the hottest division in boxing, then that's also on him, right? I do think that Bob Arum has not done a good job with his career. And I think it's because Bob has an old way of thinking about it. He thinks, and I've heard Eddie Hearn talk about this, but he really thinks that Terrence Crawford works for him. He doesn't think that he works for Terrence Crawford. And that's where he's got it fucked up. He does work for Terrence Crawford. And so he needs to make sure that his boss gets the best fights he can, because he's considered one of the 3 to 5 best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. A lot of people call him number 1. I don't know how they do that because he hasn't fought anybody. And that may or may not be his fault, but it's just a reality. He hasn't really fought anybody. And I just think, like, if Terrence Crawford wants to have a legendary career where he fights his contemporaries, then he has to make a change. I don't know how he does that. I don't know when he does it, but he needs to, because he's never going to get any of these fights. That's what I figured out, because they've figured out that they can do it without him, because they got everybody but him, right? They don't need him. And you may be watching this going, what do you mean they don't need him? He's the best guy at the weight. But everybody else at PBC can fight each other. And there's big money fights like this one. This is one of the best fights you can make in boxing. Pacquiao at Spence. They don't need Terrence Crawford to make Pacquiao Spence. Right? So they're going to make Pacquiao Spence. So Crawford has to make himself more accessible to the welterweight division. I'm not saying if that's right or wrong, but that's what he's got to do. There's no other way. He's going to keep fucking watching from the bleachers. And that would be a shame for somebody with that much talent that I would even call a legend now, having not fought any of his contemporaries. It would be a shame if he went his whole career and retired without doing that and without us getting to really see that. Because I think Kell Brook is definitely the best fighter he's fought. And I mean, Kell Brook is barely in the top 10 at the weight anymore. He's a really good fighter, really strong technician, great jab, but it's just like, you got to fight these guys, man. You got to fight Sean Porter. You got to fight Keith Thurman. You got to fight Danny Garcia. You got to fight these guys, man. You got to fight Ugas. You have to fight your peers. And everyone else in boxing has to fight those come-up fights before they get a mega fight. But Terrence Crawford doesn't have to. What contenders at welterweight has he fought to deserve these fights? And I want to see it. But I'm just saying, who the fuck has he fought to deserve it? It's all eye test. If you think he's the best on the planet, it's all eye test, because that resume is fucking thin. Thin. And I love watching him. And I have him number 3 on my list. Purely off the eye test. Right? There's no one on that resume in the top 10 other than Kell Brook. Kavaliauskas, maybe. But there's not, none of the elite welterweights are in there. So if he could maybe even get a fight with Josh Taylor after Taylor just beat Ramirez, that's a fight I would also love to see. But I think he has to take charge of his career. You can't let Bob Arum have charge of his career anymore, man. It's a new era. You can't relinquish the power of your whole career to these fucking promoters. You just can't do it. And if you're going to, you better be in the best position possible to get the best fights possible. Otherwise, you're on the fucking bleachers. So that's episode 42 of the Slip and Weed Podcast, you guys. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be back next week. Peace.